This is the slideshow to key issue 3 of chapter 4. Why is access to folk and popular culture unequal? Now first I want to look at folk culture, even though your book doesn't mention this very much. I'll just touch on it real quick. There are some barriers to entry, of course, to folk culture, and this might seem obvious as popular culture is, well, much more popular. But access for outsiders may be limited by the distribution of folk cultures, the fact that they're isolated and many are hidden, tucked away. In the bottom right-hand picture, you see some kind of unreached peoples in the Amazon jungle. And this picture was taken from an airplane flying over. Obviously, you can't even get to these people likely without them shooting arrows at you, or the possibility of that happening. So you're going to have limited access to them. And then top left, you have Orthodox Jews. And this is an example of a particular folk culture which an outsider might have limited access to. Not that they may not welcome you into their home or community to share with you about their life, but it's very, very difficult for a non-Jewish person to become Jewish, to become Orthodox Jewish. Now, it certainly does happen. Many people marry into, and if your mother is Jewish, it's quite easy to be considered Jewish. But if that is not the case, usually you have to find a rabbi who is willing to walk you through the conversion process to becoming part of the Jewish community. Though I will say that a number of people who are not strictly Jewish are welcomed into the community, but again, they're not going to be able to do things like go to rabbinical school or be welcomed to the Torah during a religious meeting, or a number of other possible activities. These are just two little examples of what limits access to folk cultures. Now let's talk about popular culture. The principal obstacle to accessing popular culture is lack of access to electronic media, since electronic media is how popular culture is spread. The most important electronic media format to popular culture is TV, and there's two reasons for this. One, watching TV is the most popular leisure activity in the world. And two, TV is the most important mechanism for rapidly diffusing popular culture around the world. Now I understand you may think it's got to be the internet by now. Well, it's actually still television. So TV can be found in all corners of the globe. I took this picture in a trotro, which is how a lot of people get around in Ghana, and as you can see, they're playing TV, a TV show on the ride for the entertainment of the riders, and it actually was very entertaining. This show was kind of a ridiculous soap opera with some witch casting spells on people. It was kind of cool. And of course, man, these are pretty bad images. But in the United States, we've got multiple TVs for each person here. And I just thought I'd show a couple pictures I took in Times Square a number of years ago. This is when cell phone cameras were not very good. But you may be happy to know that I finally got something off my bucket list, which was to get on one of the TVs, the giant TV screens on Times Square. Yep, I'm famous. This shows the comparison of numbers of people watching TV versus watching videos online. And I know that there are a lot of other things that you do online, social media, for instance, and that is having a growing impact on how popular culture is spread. But when we're talking about video, as you can see in every country, and this list is too long to even fit on our screens, but in every country that data exists for, TV beats out internet video. And probably the reason for that is just ease of access. If you have a television, you're likely to be able to pick up a TV signal, but with internet, you have to have a provider, and you have to have a more modern device that can pick up internet, and you have to have more money, quite simply. I don't know about the truthfulness of this from year to year. It's a few years old, but even if it is not totally accurate today, if watching TV is 50% of how Americans spend their weekends, you can imagine it's probably pretty close to that even now. TV technology originated simultaneously in multiple hearths. It means people invented it in multiple places in the early 20th century. In places like the UK, France, Germany, Japan, Soviet Union, and the United States. Over the course of the 20th century, the United States went from dominating the world's share of TVs to being nearly equal in rates of ownership with most developing countries. Meaning, simply, there are TVs everywhere now. But it is important to note that the United States led the way, and this is why so much broadcasting did come out of the United States. But we're going to look at how other countries have found it relatively easy to create their own programming, even if it's not of the caliber that much of ours is. This is showing the diffusion of television over time. In 1954, most televisions were in North America or Western Europe. By 1970, they had diffused down into South America to a less degree, and to a greater degree into Europe and Australia and New Zealand. And by the 2000s, TVs are found in most countries around the world. Let's talk about the diffusion of the internet. And the internet, we are just beginning to see how much of an impact this is having on popular culture. And it has such an impact because it can move information so much more quickly than television, which of course has a broadcasting schedule, and a number of people have to be involved in deciding what gets transmitted on television. That's why through television we have a lot of hierarchical diffusion. But through the internet, while we very much still have hierarchical diffusion, we also are seeing just person to person. You could consider it expansion diffusion through things like social media. The diffusion follows the same pattern established by TV, but at a more rapid rate. In 1995, internet users in the United States accounted for more than half of global users. By 2011, 77% of the US population accessed the internet, accounting for 10% of the global users. And the global share decreased by roughly 40% in less than 10 years. So all those statistics really are just saying the internet has spread from America to the rest of the globe, but it's done so even more quickly than television. And you can see that here. If you were to compare these three maps with the three of television, you see how quickly, just from 95 to 2011, the internet has made it across most of the world. Certainly touched all countries of the globe, even though it's very limited still in some regions. But not as limited as you might think. This is an image, I believe, from Indonesia. I pulled it off the internet. I did not take it. But it depicts something that is very familiar across the globe, which is an internet cafe. So you may not have your own computer. You may not have your own internet access in your house or your home, but there is always a place that you can go, or there's often a place you can go to do that. So you got people playing computer games, but you've also got people sending email and getting on Facebook and stuff like that. Let's talk about social media, which is something unique to the 21st century. Again, the same diffusion pattern as TV and internet, starting in the US and spreading outward. In 2008, Facebook users in the US consisted of a third of all global users, and by 2011, the global share decreased to 1/5, just meaning Facebook went global. And people in all kind of different countries, not every country, because some countries banned Facebook, but many countries are now represented on Facebook. The same is true with Twitter. The United States was the source of a third of all tweets in 2010, and the second leader of tweets is India. And you may wonder, is this because people in India have great access to the internet and to mobile devices? Or is it because people in India are so numerous, because there's so many people? I would imagine it's probably a combination of the two. Certainly, not everyone in India has a mobile device. It's not the norm, but there are a great number of people living in cities with access to the internet with smartphones who do. This shows Facebook in 2008, the countries where you had millions of users, and then look by 2014 how much Facebook has expanded. It's pretty incredible to think of a globally connected community like Facebook. And I know Facebook may not seem important to you guys because it's definitely gone out of fashion with younger generations in the United States, but it is still hugely popular around the world, and it's not something we can ignore as a method of spreading popular culture. All the videos that are shared on there, all the articles, just the increased level of connection that people have around the globe promotes the sharing of popular culture. Sometimes it's good things, sometimes it is bad things. Like fake news was a big issue with Facebook in the last election cycle, coming from both sides of the political spectrum. And here's the distribution of Twitter users. Again, of course, most are going to be in the US, and it's the same with the diffusion of anything, right? Where it starts is likely to have the greatest number of people associated with it. If we were to look at a map of the distribution of Muslims, you would likely see the greatest density of Islam in the Middle East, which is its hearth. Even though that's not where you would find the most users, you would find the most users in Indonesia because of the high population level. But I'm a little off topic. What about challenges in accessing electronic media? So some countries perceive media from other countries as an external threat. Many developed, and this is because developed countries control the media. So TV industry is really dominated by three countries: Japan, United Kingdom, and United States. You may have seen some clips of some crazy Japanese game shows in Japan. They have certainly taken to technology over the last few decades and have made their own programming for their own culture. United Kingdom has a lot of shows. Things like Downton Abbey have become popular in the United States. But the UK has been broadcasting television for decades. And of course, most of the shows that we have access to and that most of the world has access to do come from the United States. Leaders of developing countries could view the dominance as impressing American values upon viewers. So there's a country that doesn't want to look like it's just following the United States, or doesn't want to look like it respects the United States, then they may block the media that comes out of this country. Or they might alter it, as you see here, the Iranian state TV, because it's a conservative Islamic culture. They decided that this dress was a little too revealing. Leaders, I already read that part, sorry. Some of the things that some countries may not like about Western media or popular culture media would be upward social mobility, the idea that you can move from one level of society to another. Freedoms for women, whether that's women driving or women in positions of authority or women wearing what they want to wear. The glorification of youth. So in the United States, if you turn on a TV show, just about every hero is a young person. This is not always true, but we do seem to worship youth, and not just in casting young people in TV shows, but in how hard older people try to make themselves look and seem young. But in a number of other cultures, the older you get, the more respect you gain. And of course, stylized violence, which is a huge part of our media, our TVs, our TV shows and our movies. Definitely take violence and make it seem like something that it's not, that make it seem like it's fun. Just an interesting example. There's a TV show depicted in the bottom picture called Hafsang, and it's the Islamic Republic of Iran's broadcasting answer to the ABC show Modern Family. So Modern Family, among other shows, would not be officially welcome in a largely conservative Islamic country like Iran, because they have a same-sex couple, and that is not promoted and is usually prohibited in Islam. So this is kind of an interesting case, because there have actually been fans who have looked at both shows and seen that some of the episodes are basically shot-for-shot remakes of Modern Family, just changing some things. So even in places where popular culture is altered, it is in some ways diffused, just in maybe even just in the style of a show. So I think this is a good example of how hard it is to stop popular culture from getting in. And while I'm on the subject, in places like Iran and other places where the government doesn't want people to have unbridled access to foreign television or foreign media of any sort, people still get their hands on it. They download it from satellite or using VPNs to get to different websites to get different videos. People have an amazing way of getting the media that they want, even if their government doesn't want them to. And another example of a country making its own programming so as not to promote another country would be, I don't even know what this was. I think it was just a variety show produced in the Soviet Union. And you just got to go see the Troyoyo video on YouTube if you never have. It'll change your life. News media in developing countries is dominated by the government, whereas media in the United States is largely private commercial stations. Many African and Asian government officials have criticized the freedom of the press in the United States. They think that it makes the leaders here weak, that they can't control the news. And fortunately for us, we have laws that protect the news and protect the freedom of press so that we can actually know what's going on with our government and aren't just told what they want us to hear. And so, especially for a developing country which is struggling to hang on to power, the people in the government might be struggling to hang on to power. They're not going to be likely to open up much freedom of the press, because if they do, then of course they are open to criticism, and any kind of criticism limits the amount of power that they have. Now, media can also be seen as an internal threat. So we talked about how some countries are worried that bringing media in from other countries promotes those other countries too much or promotes their values too much, but it can also be seen as an internal threat, and this is where social media comes into play. Some governments attempt to limit internet content, including political content, which can show, opposition to local government. So if you allow Facebook in this country, then that means someone can make a Facebook group that talks about what the government did wrong in this one situation. And you might rally people to be angry at the government and to push for some kind of change. Same thing with news sites that talk about political content. Or social content, socially sensitive material such as gambling or sex, which can be seen to weaken a society. And it's true that there's just a lot of filth out there on the internet, and many governments just say, we're going to avoid this problem and we're not going to permit any of it. 3, conflict and security. Armed conflict, border disputes, or militant groups. So you have one side of this is that governments don't want it to look like there's any kind of problems, and so they may limit the amount of coverage that's available on that. And then the other is that you don't want, as a government, you don't want anyone who's against you to be able to organize themselves. And the internet is such a powerful tool for organizing people together. And internet tools like email, internet hosting, internet searches, they're likely to limit those. This just shows where places where the government is very active in filtering what kind of internet material is available to people. And you see there's a lot in the Middle East and China. A lot of political content is filtered in China. Social content in the Middle East, again, it makes sense because you have in Saudi Arabia and Iran and other countries around there on the Arabian Peninsula, you have high degree of influence that Islam has in the government. And so they would want to limit social content which is not in keeping with the Islamic way of life. Again, conflict and security, any kind of potential problems where it looks like the government's not doing a good job, China doesn't want its citizens knowing about that. There's an interesting thing called the Great Firewall of China, which is not one thing, but it's all the parameters that China puts up to block different sites from its citizens. One of those is Facebook. So China has its own Facebook competitor, I guess you could say, that they're able to control and monitor. But there are some cracks in the firewall. Recently, China opened up, basically put a hole in the wall, so to speak, for one community to kind of test what it was like to give internet freedom to people. But it doesn't look like they're going to be taking down these firewalls or these prohibitions to certain parts of the internet anytime soon. But there are ways that people can get around them. Journalists have been able to send tweets using their cell phones if they have a 3G roaming network, or by using VPNs to go around the firewalls. There are ways around it, but it is certainly doing, I won't say a decent job, but it is having an effect on preventing the people of China from getting total access to popular culture, which from the perspective of the Chinese government, you could understand. They don't want people becoming too enamored with the American way of life or American media. They don't want people to have a free platform to talk bad about the government. And so they're going to keep trying to control this and monitor their people because they have a completely different ideology about how government should be a part of people's lives than we do here in the United States. All right, that's all. As always, if you have any questions, send them to me or bring them to class.